Good morning and welcome to Sunday School. This week, I'd like you to turn in your Bibles to the Gospel of John, chapter 4. Gospel of John, chapter 4. And I want to read a story involving Jesus and the Bad Samaritan. So let's read the story of the Bad Samaritan. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the story of the Good Samaritan. This is the story of the Bad Samaritan. The Good Samaritan was a man. The Bad Samaritan was a woman. So John chapter 4, beginning to read at verse 7. And I will read this I'll try to read it with the voice inflection that indicates the true nature of the conversation that Jesus had with this bad Samaritan. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? The Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman saith to him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water, springing up into everlasting life. The woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. Jesus saith unto her, Go call thy husband, and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast said well, that I have no husband. For thou have had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. And that you told the truth. The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you don't know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. The woman saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he'll tell us all these things. Jesus saith unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. And upon this came his disciples and marveled that he talketh with a woman, yet no man said, What seekest thou? Or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come, see a man, which told me all the things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came unto him. All right, that ends the reading with verse 30. An interesting story about this bad Samaritan woman who was a consecutive polygamist, one spouse right after another. Well, who are these Samaritans? And why did they not like the Jews and the Jews not like them? Well, it was about 500 years before this story that the Jewish exile occurred. But a few of the men, the Jewish men, remained in Israel, and they took local girls from other tribes and entered into mixed marriages. Now, God told them not to do that because these women didn't belong to God. These were Samaritans because they lived near Samaria. That's why they were called Samaritans. And when the pure Jews came back from the exile, the Samaritans wanted to link up with them. The pure Jews said, no, you can't do that. You're not pure. And so they hated each other. And the Jews, to get past Samaria, would walk around Samaria, many extra miles to get from north to south. If you look on your map, you can find Samaria in between Mount Gerizim and another mount that skips my mind at this moment, the name of it. But it's to the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee, is where this is at, this region. And there are still Samaritans living. There's about 250 of them that remain at Mount Gerizim. And they only have the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. They don't have any other parts of the Bible. They are very poor people. They're a tribal people, very poor. And one thing you should note here, did Jesus ever get that drink of water? Did she ever give him any water? No, he never did get that drink of water. She put her water pot down and went back to tell the men. She didn't tell the women. Now, why was she there at the middle of the day, the hottest time of the day for a woman to go fill water pots and carry them on her head? And where do we find that at? Well, we can see this in the Bible. I think I read past that. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, where did I see that that's noon? It's in the text someplace. The middle of the day is where this is at. Anyway, it's the hottest part of the day. She was there at that point in time because she didn't want to meet anybody else. There's no indication in the scriptural text that she's a prostitute. She could have been a prostitute, and the person that she was living with was her pimp. She was certainly immoral. There's no indication here that her previous husbands had died upon her. Jesus seems to indicate that in his statement, well, the one you're living with now is not your husband. If she was of high enough moral character, then she wouldn't have been living with this man. And that seems to indicate that she was an adulteress, is what Jesus was getting at. So that's why I call her the bad Samaritan. And that is not original with me. There are others that have called her the bad Samaritan. But I want you to notice this conversation. Jesus is trying to tell her that there's this thing known as living water, and she's sarcastic. She doesn't believe it. She says, well, you don't have anything to draw with, and the well is deep. How are you going to get this living water? She doesn't understand that Jesus is speaking to her in a spiritual sense. Doesn't understand that at all. And she says, do you think you're greater than Jacob, our father? He was a big, strong man, and he drew water out of this well, and you don't have anything to draw water with. And Jesus again is trying to tell her what he's talking about is something in the spiritual realm, not in the physical realm, that you can be filled with his spirit. And even though everything is collapsing around you, you won't have to be refilled. You'll always have that indwelt presence of the Holy Spirit with you. Now, no Jewish rabbi would have had dealings with a strange woman, especially a Samaritan. There was absolutely no way. And you can see this when his disciples came back. They were so shocked they didn't say anything to him. They were considered, again, unclean because of their racial heritage. They were descendants of the northern tribes that intermarried with Gentiles brought into the land by Assyria. And you can read that in 2 Kings chapter 17, particularly verse 24. And they were unacceptable and because of their religious practices. And Jesus and the woman get into this in terms of, well, she's trying to deflect the conversation from this living water over to worship practices. And that's a technique that people will have today to avoid debating the gospel message. They'll debate techniques and worship patterns and those types of things. But this is another reason that the Samaritans were unacceptable to the Jews. Although both groups worshiped Jehovah, they worshiped different places. The Jews in Jerusalem and the Samaritans on Mount Gerizim, and that's in verse 20 in our reading. And so the in light of the Jewish practice, her response to Jesus was sarcastic. In other words, you Jews think we Samaritans are dogs until you're thirsty, then you're satisfied to ask for a favor. Now, John placed this discussion with the bad Samaritan woman right after Jesus' discussion with Nicodemus in chapter 3. Now, Nicodemus was in the he was a religious leader of the Jews at that point in time. And this is the man that asked Jesus when Jesus says, "You must be born again." He takes it literally and says, "Well, how can I get back inside my mother's womb and be born a second time?" And again, he didn't understand what Jesus was talking about. Jesus was talking about spiritual birth, not the actual physical birth. And he was everything that she was not. He was a Jew, she was a Samaritan, he was a man, she was a woman, he was a learned scholar, she was ignorant, unlearned, he was morally upright, she was sinful. But Jesus showed the same patience in breaking through her defenses as he did in explaining the new birth to the dignified Nicodemus. Jesus cuts through all cultural issues, all gender issues, all educational issues, all racial issues. He just cuts right through all of that because at the foot of the cross, we're all equal anyway. And he's offering the free gift of God. It's a gift beyond anything that she could buy. And his purpose for meeting her, I think, is pretty clear because while she continued to think on the material level, just like the learned Nicodemus did, Jesus gradually led her to the spiritual gift that he offered, which was living water. Now, this offer of living water by a man that didn't even have a bucket struck her as absurd. And Jesus claims to be that source. I think there's one thing here, if you understand the background behind this, and let me give you the Greek language here that really would have struck with this woman, because it's some words that Jesus spoke, and it really doesn't translate well into our English. But if you look at verse 26, actually 25, the woman saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he comes, he'll tell us all these things. He'll tell us all things. We'll understand when he comes. And Jesus says to her, and the King James says, I that speak unto thee am he. The original version of this was Jesus spoke unto her, I am. Now, she had the first 5 books of the Bible. And if she's heard them, she knew that when Moses met God on the mountain and when Moses asked him, who should I say sent me? And God says, say that I am sent you. Jesus here is mirroring that same language that was used back earlier in the Pentateuch. I am in the Exodus story. Tell them that I am sent you. And that probably registered with her. And you see, uh, she leaves her water pot in verse 28 and goes her way into the city and saith to the men. She doesn't go talk to the women. The women don't want anything to do with her. That's another indication to me in the reading that she is not a person that whose 5 previous spouses had died on her and then she remarried. No, because the women didn't want anything to do with her. She was not respected. She's going to the well midday so that she can avoid seeing other women. She goes to the men. She doesn't go talk to the women, which is unusual anyway. And I think that she's not respected among the women. Of course, the men liked her. She was easy. She was easy prey for them. And so they all knew who she was. So she went and talked to the men. So she shared about this Jesus fellow she met at the well with the men. So she should have understood, it would seem, that Jesus was speaking of spiritual truth, not just a better source of water. But, this dullness of mind and spirit, how does it illustrate those who are dying of spiritual thirst or who are seeking to satisfy that thirst with other things? Don't you see how other people try to satisfy the void in their life, the lack of God, with other things? And it never satisfies. Gary Bond, an evangelist in the Church of Nazarene, beautiful singer, deep baritone bass voice, uh, sings the song "Satisfied." I'm satisfied, and that's what he's talking about. This is what he's talking about in that song? You can be satisfied spiritually. Jesus said in verse 14, whoever drinks of the living water, he'll never thirst again. It's not that it just merely satisfies our thirst, it satisfies our spiritual thirst to be one with God, to be truly His, to be all of His, and to be filled by Him. That's what it means to never thirst again in a spiritual sense. Now, this sharing of the gospel, let me focus on that, give you a little story here that happened as I record this on Friday before the Sunday that you see it. I just come home from the office this afternoon. I have two people working for me this afternoon. Clint, who has worked for me for several years. He spends about 15 hours a week working for me. And then we have another young man who's a college student that's started working for me alongside Clint. I came home and I was talking with Clint, and Clint said, I don't know how you want to deal with this, but he was down in our North Woods burning, and the neighbor came out. And he said, Daryl came out and just wanted to talk to me. And they went on and on. And Daryl is a person that pretty rough around the edges, foul language, those types of things. Not a Christian at all, shows no evidence of it. He does say that he believes that there is a God. But Clint said that Daryl opened the conversation by, I don't understand why God doesn't make it rain. We need rain. God knows we need rain. Why doesn't He make it rain? And really cursing God, those types of things. And Clint told me that the conversation went on for 45 minutes between he and Daryl. And Clint got to, and you'd have to know Clint to know the way that he shares the gospel with people. He has a unique ability to do this. He's an evangelist. He's a Wesleyan ordained evangelist, and his ministry is to rural churches. And so he's very comfortable doing this. Gene and I also have a friend that's a retired itinerant evangelist. Very easy for him to talk with people on the street, just complete strangers, and share the gospel with them. And Clint told me that at the end of the conversation, that Daryl said, there's something different about you, Clint. I've had preachers talk to me before, and they don't really want anything to do with me. We'll talk a few minutes, and then they just throw up their hands and leave and don't have anything to do with me. And he said, I really enjoyed talking with you. You didn't just leave. You heard what I had to say, and we talked about these things. And Clint said that, Daryl, I'll get your phone number from Roger, and I'll send you some things. And Clint said Daryl told him that I'll read those. I promise you, I'll read those. Now, I didn't get 45 minutes of work out of Clint, but that's okay. He's evangelizing a neighbor of mine. I've visited with Daryl. I have a friendship with Daryl. And Clint, I think, furthered that for God. And he's done the same thing with my heavy equipment operator, Tom, excuse me. And I'm going to need to stop because I'm losing my voice. So I will cut it there. See you next time.